you to imagine your best possible future self and ask, what if I took a risk instead of taking a pass? Imagine it, unbeatable focus, unstoppable passion, incredible resilience, true honor, flourishing family, and more, much more. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a proud and welcome everyone. I am really excited about today's live stream. It is 10 a.m. We've got 3 of these bad boys today together, but this is my good friend Tony Buzbee. Tony is one of the great leaders of all time. We're having some audio issues here, so let me know, Nev, if we have any audio issues on our end. But Tony is what the New York Times described as a big, mean, ambitious, tenacious, fire-breathing Texas trial lawyer. Really big, period. Poster boy big, period. Tony has tried multiple cases to verdict, obtaining more than $10 billion in verdicts and settlements over the course of his career. He has 5 jury verdicts exceeding 100 million, one exceeding $500 million. Tony is the subject of the book Defining Moments and has appeared on the cover of New York Times Magazine. In 2015, Tony was named Attorney of the Year by Texas Lawyer due to winning 8 cases in a single year, all while representing Governor Rick Perry in his criminal case that Tony was ultimately able to get dismissed. Tony has the highest verdicts awarded in multiple courts across Texas. The New York Times has described Tony Buzbee simply as one of the most successful lawyers in the country. Welcome, Tony.
Glad to be here. Let's promote this book, Rick.
we got to sell books. We got to sell books today.
Sell books.
Oh. It is bestseller book day. If you guys have looked at the book, you notice Tony gave me a lovely blurb on the back, which just really meant the world. And Tony's just always been supportive. I think Tony is one of those great men that blend competency and compassion, humility, generosity, and ferocity. And so that's one of the reasons why I respect Tony. Tony and Francis are very close friends of Shannon and mine. So we're excited, especially about this conversation today. But Tony, I read all those great things by New York Times about you. People see you on the news. People hear about your name with the Diddy case and the Jay-Z case and the Travis case and all these gigantic, just events all over the place. But walk us through who is Tony Buzbee at your essence?
Just a country lawyer, honestly. I grew up, and we were talking a little bit about this, as a son of a butcher, although he called himself a meat cutter because he was a union meat cutter. And my mother drove our school bus and also worked in our cafeteria, in the middle school cafeteria. She got a promotion and moved into the snack bar, which was a big deal for our family because she got an extra 50 cents an hour. But we were close knit and, very modest means, in a little city that was about 9 miles, we were south of Texarkana in the Queen City, Atlanta area. And I know, Rick, you've been there. And we lived 9 miles outside of that town. And the town was 1,300 people. So really small town. I went to church every Sunday, Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night, vacation Bible school. My mother was assistant song leader in our church. My dad would never set foot in the church, one of those kind of things. And was always working outside. My dad always had some kind of project going on, and I was the oldest boy of 4 kids, and he expected me to work. And whether he was sitting under the tree drinking Budweiser or not, I was working. And he always, he never called somebody else to do the job. We always did everything around our house, and also had animals and had a garden, hunted during hunting season and fished during the summers. And so for me, a guy like me to be able to I was listening to your intro, for me to come from where I came from, to where I am now is God bless America is all I can say about that. God bless America. But I take, I wear that as a badge of honor, my childhood and the things I went through. I was born, I had double pneumonia. It was touch and go for a long time. Me and my father almost drowned in a lake once when our boat turned over during a very bad storm. I went in after I left A&M. I went into the Marines and served in Persian Gulf and Somalia. So I had a lot of events in my life that I've always felt that somebody was watching out for me, and so I'm very grateful and very aware that there's a reason that God put me here in the position I'm in, and I need to every day try to give something back in that respect. So that's really who I am. Of course, I get a lot of cases and have a lot of fun in that respect, but the best cases I've been on are cases you never heard about, cases where I've done a really meaningful work that no one other than the individual I'm representing knows about it. Maybe a corporation might know about it as well, but different issue. But I can think of, we were trying the other day, trying to think of all the things we've done through the litigation process that may have made things better. Because we hear about lawyers and ambulance chasers and millions for the lawyers and pennies for the clients. But I'm thinking about, I can just look out this window here at my house and I can see this insulation on this guy wire to the electric pole. Those are there because of a case that I did. I can think about because two kids were horrifically burned and one died and was revived, and one of them lost his leg because he touched a guy wire. You wouldn't think a guy wire would be able to be electrified, but it can be because it doesn't have or it didn't have the proper insulation on the top of the pole. And Centerpoint, which was the defendant in that case, retrofitted 880,000 electric poles to make sure that didn't happen again. But I think about offshore winches where they put guards on them when young people on doing their summer work were crushed and killed. I think about a dry cleaning machine that had this dangerous defect that would blow open, and one of them blew open down in Friendswood and burned this poor man, 90% of his body, third degree burns. And the list goes on and on. We hear about Diddy, and we hear about the Chris Brown case, or the Shannon Sharp case, or the Astroworld case, or the BP, and all those. And of course, those are super important cases, and they're really fun to work on. And you're working with the best lawyers in the country who are on your side or on the other side. But I think the cases that really, when I'm lying in bed and wondering, am I making any kind of difference here? Am I doing the right thing? I don't think about those cases. I think about the ones I've just talked about.
What would you say? You mentioned your time in the Marines and your military service there, and you have all these impactful things. And I imagine a lot of these events, a lot of these trials are emotionally draining at times, emotionally uplifting at other times. Are there other things in your life that you would consider major pivots, especially things like meeting mentors or just happenstance actions that your life would have been a totally different type of life had you not had those?
Yeah, I mean, I've never, mentorship is so important, and I try to the extent I have the time to provide that as well. Certainly for the lawyers that work for me and work with me at my law firm. But there are a couple of moments in my life that somebody who didn't have to do anything kind to me stepped in and did me a kindness. One of those was a man who was the head of our electric co-op in Atlanta, Texas. He had seen me playing football, and I was small for my age, but I was very tenacious, probably pretty slow, and probably had terrible hands. But one thing that I could control was how hard I tried, and so I tried very hard. And I think he saw that at the football games, and so he called my mother. And remember, nobody in my family had ever been to college. I didn't know anybody that had been to college. I didn't know I couldn't even tell you the name of a lawyer. But this man was class, I think, of 1968, Texas A&M. And for whatever reason, I don't know why he decided to do this, but he called my mother and said, I'd like to take your son to a Texas A&M football game, and I'd like for him to see the Corps cadets at Texas A&M march in, because I think he'd really enjoy that. And the joke is, of course, that if today somebody called you, Rick, and said, "I want to take your daughter somewhere," somebody who was in his 60s, you would not only say no, you'd say hell no, and you'd probably report him. But my mother was extremely flattered by this, and she told me about it, and I said, absolutely, of course, I've never seen a college football game. I'd never been on a college campus. So he came and picked me up early in the morning, and he took me to College Station. And the difference between College Station and Atlanta, Texas, is the difference between New York City and I'm trying to think of a small town, but it's a huge difference, obviously. And to me, it was like, oh my God, look at this huge metropolis, and look at all these people and this stadium and all of these guys in uniform looking so crisp and professional, and these guys were just 3 or 4 years older than me. They all had their buzz cuts, and they were very squared away, and I was super impressed. I watched them march in. We had good seats at the game. We watched A&M beat Arkansas that game, and I came home late that night with this man, and as he dropped me off at my house, I was thinking the whole way home, that's what I want to do. And that was just one of those defining moments of my life that but for Mr. Helt intervening in my life would have never happened. And so you think about when you go about your day every day, and you say you do a small kindness for somebody, or let's say you reach out to somebody and send them a nice text, or you see somebody on the street and maybe somebody's struggling, you give them $100 or whatever. You really never know what a small kindness like that, what it can do for somebody. And that's what Mr. Helt did for me, because thereafter my plan before he took me to A&M was to just enlist in the military, because I didn't have any other plan. And when I saw what could possibly be in my life, then I started working towards trying to figure out a way to go to college. And, of course, my parents couldn't help me. They couldn't help me financially, and they couldn't help me with any sort of institutional knowledge, because they'd never been. And but luckily I found my way to A&M. And when I got there, it was just a whole new world. And, people joke about A&M and so forth, and, the Aggies. But for me, Texas A&M completely changed my life. I learned that I could compete. I learned that there was a whole bigger world out there than Cass County, Texas. And, I guess, as they say, after that, I was off and running.
So you also have the Busby Leadership Center there at A&M, which I think has been one of the more impactful things. I think if you look back 30 years from now and you look at the impact that has had, just simply because of the disproportionate amount of that influence that leadership plays, like within the world at large. For instance, you could have one or two great leaders that come out of that center and revolutionize the world, where you couldn't have that happen in almost every other building on that campus. But you played a critical role there. Walk me through, what's attracted you to the concept and the belief in that good quality leadership is imperative in our current world. And like, where did that start to get formed in you?
At A&M, we they really took a bunch of farm boys in the Corps cadets and made them into men. The old joke is a lot of people that go to A&M are from the bigger or that go to UT are from the bigger cities. And certainly during my time, most of the people that were going to Texas A&M were from the small towns across the Texas. A lot of us had played sports, so we had a little bit of leadership there. We know that the number one principle in leadership, at least from my point of view, is leading by example. So that was burned into your brain. Setting goals burned into your brain. They required us to keep a 3x5 on our little desk. So every day we looked at our monthly goals, our semester goals, our yearly goals, our life goals. So that was another thing that they just kind of ingrained into you, put you into positions of leadership. As a freshman, to be a good leader, you first have to be a good follower. And so they really teach you how to be a good follower. And then as you start stepping up as a sophomore, they give you small leadership roles and they evaluate you and give you feedback. And then you move up to, a junior and you have a larger role. And then eventually, if you've excelled, they put you in charge of, like for me, I was in charge of several hundred cadets, and we competed against the other units, and we did quite well in that respect. And everything from marching to exercise, calisthenics, everything you can think of, grades. We really emphasize grades. And also emphasize, okay, here's where you are now. Where do you want to be in the future? Are you going to choose the military like I did and be a young lieutenant and continue this? Or are you going to go into the civilian world and lead in that respect? So that's the Texas A&M Corps Cadets, certainly when I was there, was a real leadership. It was all about leadership. It was a place where a young person could try on for size, if you will, various leadership positions and really learn how to lead while you're doing it. A lot of practical application versus a lot of reading in the book. And then when I went into the Marines, I did very well in my initial training, such that I was number one in my class of, I think, 219 lieutenants. So I had a choice. I could have, I had good eyes then. I could have been a flyboy, or a lot of the other positions, but I think the essence of the Marine Corps is infantry, and that's what I chose, and I'm glad I did. That I think some of the best non-commissioned officers in the entire military are in the Marines. Some of the best senior officers in the military are in the Marines. And talk about putting you in positions of make you a man very quick. The Marine Corps will do it for you. And what I learned in the Marines is not just leadership, because they have the leadership traits and principles that get burned in your brain. They had a really aggressive reading program where they required young lieutenants to read. And they had forums where you discussed what you read. You would study battles. You would read about leadership philosophy. You'd read about practical application of tactics and strategy. And you'd be evaluated in that respect, in addition to how you led your particular platoon and how proficient you were just in being a young lieutenant. That really changed my life. It not only taught me about leadership and how to lead an organization, but it also taught me at some point when I was a commanding officer of the 1st Recon Company, the 1st Marine Regiment, I also had to deal with budgeting. I had to deal with equipment. I had to dealing with senior officers and making reports and all the things you probably typically don't think about when you're thinking about the military, but it's really hands-on, and you just are drinking from a fire hose, and you have to learn, swim or sink. And luckily I swam. And what it taught me, in addition to all those things, was, you can compete. You measure up, and that's something a young person who comes from they don't have a structure surrounding them, a support structure like I did not have. And I'm not criticizing my parents. It's just they did the best they could, and they knew what they knew. When you get to a place like A&M and you figure out, hey, these guys are no better than me. In fact, in a lot of cases, I can beat these people. I can excel in this forum. And then you get in the Marine Corps and you're competing literally with young lieutenants from almost every university and academy across the country. And you figure out that, hey, I was ranked number one of 50 lieutenants in my battalion. I can compete. I can excel. And then when you're chosen as a commanding officer of the historic 1st Marine, 1st Recon, which is usually a major position, and you're chosen as a captain select, then you start to think to yourself, wow, maybe I'm pretty good at this. But ultimately, you have to put food on the table. And for me, I figured out very quickly that God bless them, the life of a U.S. Marine who deploys 6 months every 2 years, it's a hard life. And it's especially hard, it's fun when you're single. It's fun when you don't have any attachments back home. it becomes very difficult when you're married. It becomes even more difficult when you want to have a family, and you don't know every 3.5 years where you're going to be next. And then also, certainly during my time frame, the pay as for a young captain was not very good. And so I started looking toward. I started thinking like, okay, I've been to every cool school there is. I've been to mountain warfare school. I've been to SEER school. I've been to dive school. I've been to combat dive school. I've done all these cool things. I've been to 20 countries. I've trained with the Royal Australian Marines. I've trained in Singapore with their military force. I've trained um, uh, in Okinawa. I've actually given classes to Saudi troops and Kuwaiti troops, and it's a whole chapter there. But what do I want to do next? Do I want to be an instructor in Washington D.C.? I don't think I want to do that. I don't think I want to do that. I think I've squeezed all the juice out of this grape I'm going to squeeze, and I need to start figuring out something else. One thing I've always recommended to young.
Pause right there. Pause. I just want to kind of figure out like, what's happening mentally. Are you saying that do you know at this time that you want to build some wealth, or you want to be a highly relevant individual, or is this something like you just want to try something new? What's happening in the background?
I never thought about being relevant. I wish I had that sort of vision. I'm not, unfortunately, I don't have, or certainly in that time of my life, I didn't have that kind of vision. But I, just as frankly as I can say it and candidly as I can say it, I did not want to be poor. I had tried that and I didn't like it. And on top of that, I felt like I'd done as much as the fun stuff as there, at least from my perspective as a young person, that I could do. And one of the habits that I really try to impress upon young people who I speak to, not just the lawyers and people that work with me, but also when I'm asked to give a speech here and there, is the importance of reading. I know that's something that you have spoken about quite often, but it cannot be underestimated. Reading, maybe not as cool or in vogue today as it was in the past, but there's a lot of things to be learned. And I was a voracious reader and still am. It's a habit that I developed really early in my life and continue to this day. I'm usually reading 3 or 4 books, and I'm kind of the belief that if you're 3 chapters into a book and it's not speaking to you, life is short. Move on to the next one, and maybe you'll circle back to that one later. When you're in a different mindset. But so I'm always reading, and in the Marines, I was always reading. When we deployed to the Persian Gulf, I shared a ship room with 3 other lieutenants, and we decided to pool all of our books. And so we had 2 footlockers full of books, and I was reading daily. And at some point, 4 or 5 months into it, I had read every book that we had. And in those days, it wasn't like we could just stop at the next port and go out and buy books. I mean, we didn't have internet, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have the luxuries that the deployed troops have today. So there was one book in the group that I hadn't read. It was the LSAT prep book. One of the lawyers, or one of the young lieutenants in our group, apparently had decided that he wanted to go to law school at some point, so he brought that book along. So just out of just sheer boredom, I was reading through the book and reading how to take the test and doing the practice tests. And I was like, my goodness, I'm pretty good at these practice tests. So when we got back to San Diego, I decided to sign up to take the LSAT. Again, it's just one of those things I did. Something was pushing me in that respect. I don't know what it was, but it's just in my mind. I decided somewhere around the Horn of India that when I get back, I'm going to take the LSAT. So when I got back, I took the LSAT and scored pretty well on it, and decided, this is something's telling me that it's my time to take a jump and take a leap and do something different. So that's how I ended up here in Houston, going to law school.
Thank you. The idea that there's some sort of career there that might be the pathway. based off you being good on something. Were you also good with your personal skills? So for instance, I you very rarely see an attorney perform. You hear about the wins, you hear about the successes, you see them in public, but you never really get a chance to see an attorney actually like in a trial. And I
Yeah.
think for a lot of us, when we saw you last year with the gigantic Ken Paxton trial, which you you won, and it was one of you basically overcame not only the Bush dynasty but also the whole entire House of Representatives from my perspective. But
Yeah.
it was evident the quality of your emotional intelligence and your communication skills. Did you have a glimmer of your capacity to communicate with people back at that time, or have a glimmer of insight that you understood people emotionally and imaginatively like you do now?
There's been several times in my life that I remember someone saying to me, "Hey, you're good at that." I remember my battalion commander. I had to give some class. We were very big on reading and giving classes, and we had what they call hip pocket classes. So we never wanted to waste any time. So lieutenants were required. When we were out in the field training, the battalion commander may say, "Hey, Lieutenant Busby, I want you, we got a downtime of 20 minutes. I want you to come over and give us a class. What do you have?" And I would have my little hip pocket, I just had a little note card, and I would speak to the entire battalion and give them a class. And I became kind of a favorite of the battalion commander because he said, you're really good at that. And I knew that when my captain was rating the lieutenants and the battalion commander rated lieutenants, they always rated me high on leadership. And when I did my initial Marine Corps training, I was ranked number one in leadership, which is similar to what I think you're talking about, the emotional intelligence. And so that was the first time. The second time anyone ever mentioned that to me, I mean, I didn't go about my business thinking, "Oh, look at me, I'm a good talker." It really wasn't something I even focused on. But I remember, law school was something completely new to me. It was, I treated it as a job. I showed up at 7 a.m., parked in the parking lot, and I never left the campus until 5 or 6 in the afternoon. I lived down in Webster, Texas with my wife at the time. And so it was just like, that was my 7 to 6 job every day. But I remember the first time I spoke in class, one of my classmates said to me after, "Hey, you speak really well." And that was the first time anyone had ever, other than my battalion commander and captain, had ever said to me something. I started thinking, well, maybe I'll do this mock trial thing. And so I started the mock trial. And at the time, U of H had a really good mock trial program where they taught you, all the rules of evidence, and they taught you how to argue things and kind of like the theory behind it. And I did really well at that. But I do think you're right. I think all most people know about the practice of law is what they read in the paper about this win or that loss, or what they see on legal shows. Anybody who's ever been selected for a jury and sat through a jury trial, for the most part, come away from that a little disappointed that it's not as exciting, that there's none of those, Perry Mason moments, that sort of thing. I try to make, when I do a presentation in a trial, I try to, I prepare people in advance. Like, look, one thing we're going to do is we're going to have a good time together, and you're going to be entertained. And I think at the end of this, you are going to feel like that you did something meaningful and important, and it was not a waste of your time. So that I always have that focus. And I think the Paxton trial was one of those rare instances where millions of people were able to see the actual ins and outs of a trial. And millions of people viewed that, and I think people still view the closing arguments and send me little notes and messages about that. So I think that was beneficial, not only to me personally, of course, but was beneficial to the process itself, and make people at least understand a little bit more of how things work, how things are supposed to work. And that was, a hell of a trial. And I was glad to be chosen to be involved in it.
The PR behind your side on the trial was epic. I'll never forget after the win, you had a social post go out immediately that says, "Have gun, will travel." And so I'll just
As we went after the trial was over, I'll tell you, Lieutenant Governor Patrick was very attuned. He did a lot of research. God bless him. He did his very best, not being a lawyer, to call them straight down the middle. I had no idea. People don't really believe this, but I had no idea what his point of view was on the entire fiasco. Like, I didn't know he was I knew he had issues with the speaker. Obviously, I'm not so silly not to understand that he had butted heads with the Speaker of the House. But laying that aside, I didn't know he didn't have any communication with us. He didn't have any communication with my client, Ken Paxton. We didn't have any idea where, how he felt about the allegations. And he played the rulings were straight down the middle. I was very, I think most of the time, either we were probably 50% of the time unhappy with his rulings. They were 50% of the time unhappy. We were 50% of the time unhappy, which I think tells you that he was doing probably, doing the right thing. Even when we start, even him issuing a gag order early on, when Ken Paxton was first impeached, and I was hired. Cogdell had been representing him in his criminal matter. We went to the Republican Party headquarters and did a press conference, and we came out pretty hard. And I did that because when Rick Perry had been indicted, I had done the same thing, and we had gotten ahead of it and wanted to get our side of the story out there. So there's two competing narratives, because if you say nothing, then there's only one narrative, and especially with the liberal press, that's all they're going to report. So we came out pretty hard. And I think that kind of, and this is just my observation. I've never talked to Dan Patrick about this, but I think he felt very uncomfortable with how hard we came out. And so shortly thereafter, he issued a gag order. Well, that really hamstrung us in a huge way. We were gagged, and we didn't want to challenge it because we'd have to challenge it with him, and he was going to be the trial judge. So, we had no way to get our story out. On the other hand, the House Board of Managers, they were very cozy with the Houston Chronicle, the Texas Tribune, specifically Dallas Morning News, and none of those outfits, none of those press entities had anything good to say about Ken Paxton. So the lawyers on their side were not making any statements to the press. They were complying with the gag order, but the members of the House were not complying with the gag order because they didn't have to. And so every two or 3 days, there'd be some article that was negative about Ken Paxton, and Tribune or one of those entities would call me, and I'd be like, I can't say anything. I'm gagged. Now, if I were to say something, I would say this, but I'm not going to say that. I tried the old Trump routine, but it didn't. We were just got hammered for many, many months as they continued to leak evidence that had been unvetted, and they continued to leak evidence. And so it was, by the time that we got to the trial, it was almost like, you practice the game of football for years and you never get to play, and you finally get to play. The coach says, "You're in." We were just like, whoa, we had a lot we wanted to say, and we didn't have a lot of time to say it. One thing I did in that trial, that even my own members of my own team were scratching their head, and even today are still scratching their heads because they still don't understand what I was trying to do, was, we had 30 senators at our backs. When we stood up at the podium for opening and closing arguments, we would face them. But for the most part, they were literally right behind us. Okay. And I kept telling my co-counsel, that is not our audience. That's our jury. They kept saying, "That, Tony, that's our jury." I said, that is not our audience. And one thing that I think the only two people, and I might be wrong, maybe there are others, but I maintain that there were only two people in that trial who actually knew who the proper audience was: Ken Paxton and myself, and ultimately probably Dan Patrick. Because when I did the closing argument and I talked about the Bush era and I talked about this and that, people are like, what the hell is this guy talking about? He's like, where is he? What is this? I knew that there were 6 senators who were on the fence. I knew that. But I also knew that there was nothing I was going to be able to say to them specifically that was going to change their mind. I knew the only reason they were on the fence is because they were waiting to see which way the wind was blowing. And God bless them. I mean, it's a political trial. We can say what we want. It was a political trial. And I was trying to create the wind to blow their position in my favor. And so, yeah, my audience was Twitter sphere, which is a mess, but that was my audience, and thought leaders in the Republican Party, specifically the far right Republican Party. And so that's why, I talked about George Bush. That's why I talked about Jeb or JP or whatever it's young Bush. That's why I did all these things, because I wanted to demonstrate that there was more at foot here than just, House Board of Managers who spent less than 24 hours taking triple hearsay to do an indictment or an impeachment. Yeah, that's very persuasive and very compelling, but the 30 people behind me were well aware of all that. What I wanted to put this in a larger context and convince and persuade the people that were going to be on their computer, sending out tweets and so forth, and calling their senators and texting their senators and tweeting at their senators and all. And to my credit, it worked.
It did.
And people say, well, it was a foregone conclusion. The Paxton trial was a foregone. It was a show trial. Everything had already been. That's not true at all. Not true at all. I guarantee you, had the other side come forward with real evidence in a persuasive, compelling way, and had we argued the elements, which is what some of the people on our team wanted to argue the law. There was one person on our team that wanted to do a 20-minute presentation on the power of the Senate and all kinds of arcane bullshit that didn't matter one iota. And I just had to put a kibosh on that. Now we're not doing that. And well, I've got a 20-minute PowerPoint. I think we should start the closing with a 20-minute PowerPoint on the power of the Senate and the historical context of the impeachment. And I was just like, you're already boring me. I'm bored just literally right now as you're speaking. We're not doing that. And what people also don't know is that, we were going to split up the closing argument, but the night before I was told no one else is going to speak. And obviously there's only one person that could tell me this. So I think we know who told me that, but I only want one person talking in the closing argument. And I was like, well, we've already kind of split up the time. And it's like, no, run the clock out. That's what I was told. And the one good thing I'm good at, I think, or maybe just one thing I'm good at is if you say, I need you to speak for 30 minutes, I can speak to 30 minutes and wrap it up. And whether you say 20 minutes, I can do 20, 30, I can do 30, 50, I can do 50. And so that's kind of how that went down. But even so, when, we went through each of the articles and we had to go through each person voting, it was gut wrenching. It was, I still think about that, walking into the Senate chamber in the rotunda with our rotunda at the Capitol is taller than our U.S. Capitol, into the Senate, standing room only, 30 senators at my back, the Attorney General as my client, the Lieutenant Governor as the judge, with almost the entire constabulary of the Republican Party in the state house over to the right, all of them, trying to lead by committee. The best thing I did in that entire trial, understanding the historical significance of that, but the best thing I did was to say early on, like, we're not gonna do this by committee. When Ken Paxton said to me, like, there was kind of I think it was Mitch Little, who has become a really close friend of mine. He's of course now a state rep, Harvard trained lawyer. smart as a whip, very, very smart guy, probably the smartest guy on our team. He, we were all in a group, a big room, big conference room in Frisco, Texas, and a bunch of lawyers in there. We had lawyers on the conference line from DC, New York. I mean, nobody really knew how are we going to do this. And so at some point, the Paxton was going around the room, and I said, I was just listening. I usually in a group like that, I just listen. And Paxton asked me, like, Tony, what are your thoughts? I said, well, one thing I know is clear. I've done this before. You have to pick somebody to be in charge, and you have to let them be in charge. And about that time, Mitch, and I had to already talk to Mitch Little. I mean, a lot of times when you're in these big groups, you coordinate this stuff, and you set it up that way. But I hadn't talked to anybody about this. But I just wanted Ken Paxton to know that you cannot try this case by committee. I think we saw that doesn't work on the other side. And Mitch Little chimed in right about that time and said, Tony, it should be you. And Ken Paxton says, I agree. And once that happened, I said, okay, you can hang up on the people from New York. And we don't need anybody from Washington, D.C. And frankly, we don't need 90% of the people in this room, because all we need is a couple of people to talk, and we need everybody else to feed us the information we need. And that's kind of how we tried the case. And I think that's the reason our message was so succinct and so clear, and the message from the other side was kind of garbled and all over the board.
Yeah, yeah. I think in the NBA they say there's only one ball. There's only one ball. So I want to move over. We do have some comments that are sort of stacking up from YouTube that we'll get to here in a second. I want to encourage people to add questions. So we're seeing the questions from all the different channels here. So we've got them all on one screen that we'll get to here in a second. Try to, if you're mentioning people that are not public figures that might be clients of Tony's, we're not going to ask those questions. So if you can ask questions without names or with public figures, I think that would be helpful. But looking forward to getting to that. Tony, there's so many young men, especially that are watching the stream and that are going to come back and watch it afterwards, looking for some direction. A lot of guys didn't have that pivot with the Marines, didn't have the pivot with A&M that you had, didn't have that story coming out of them, and maybe they're in their mid-30s, they're struggling, and they realize all of a sudden that they want something more. They want to have a family, they want to have a career, they want to do something more with their lives. Could you speak to that man that's maybe in his early to mid-30s and looking for how to move out of a place where he feels stuck?
Yeah, in the Marines, and I think in most the literature surrounding warfighting, and it may sound like I'm going off topic here, but I'm really not. Doing something is always better than doing nothing. I mean, you may be sitting there like, I don't know what I want to do. Well, my advice to you is do something, because choosing to do nothing is a choice in itself. So if something's moving you in your mind, just step forward and doing it. We can sit around and prepare ourselves for a lifetime and do nothing. I prefer a person who steps forward and starts to do something and figures out, okay, this is not what I want to do, but now I've got momentum and I can adjust on the fly and get to where I think, my destiny is leading me. So the first, I'm going to talk about a few principles that I always talk about. One is, if I can do it, anybody can do it. I come from the most modest circumstance, and had a lot of luck in my life, but the truth is, it's not luck. I talk to young people all the time, and they all want to know, what is the secret to success? What is the secret? And I'm just going to tell you, there are no shortcuts, and there is no secret. The key to success, hear me, is hard work. Now, that doesn't sound sexy, and it doesn't sound like it's some kind of something that's been hid away and I've just revealed it to you, because it's not. You know what it is. It's working hard. And I don't care where you are, what your circumstance is, what has happened to you in your life, where you start from. One thing that you can control, the one absolute thing you can control is the effort and work that you put in. And so if I can't teach you to be hungry, you have to be hungry. And if you're not hungry, then you're probably going to be in the same place you are now in 10 years. So I encourage you to do something, do it now, and work hard. The second thing I want to tell you is a kind of a theme I see with young folks nowadays is this lack of persistence. Like you you have a great idea, you're going 100% at it, you're working hard, and then you hit a roadblock, and it deters you. And instead of keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back, and persisting, a lot of folks say, "Oh well, it's in the cards. It's not for me. It's not going to work for me." There are times when you hit a roadblock and you say, "Okay, I'm going to adjust ever so slightly because this is not the way that I need to go." But I would much prefer if you just, when you go to bed at night, you think about the problem and what that roadblock is and how to get around it. You wake up in the morning, you think about the problem and how to get around it. I see a distinct lack of persistence in people who consider themselves not successful. And I think hard work and persistence is these are two qualities that you really can't learn, and you have to dig deep and find them and really keep at it every day, every hour, no matter what the roadblocks are. I'm going to say something else that I say to my young folks quite often. And it's not always the most politically correct thing to say, but we spend a lot of time in our country specifically looking for ways that we can be the victim. Let me just tell you right now, you are not a victim. I don't care what has happened to you. I don't care what will happen to you. You are not a victim. The only way you're a victim is if you choose to be a victim. And I would suggest you don't choose that route because it is a dead end. And a lot of people like to go around, talking about what has happened to them. And, oh my goodness, this happened to me. Oh my goodness, this happened to me. You're not a victim. Okay. Everybody has had setbacks. Everybody's had bad stuff that's happened. Read Rick's book. I mean, I was reading it yesterday and I didn't realize some of the things that he's went through. It's not what happens to you. It's how you react to it. And, they say there are no real problems. There's only solutions. When my lawyers at my firm come to me and they say, okay, Tony, we have this real problem in this case, or we have this real issue here. What I always expect is don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. So if I could impress upon the people watching this and people that might watch this, three things. It's work hard. There's no substitute, no shortcut. Persist. I don't care what roadblock is put in front of you. You can get around it or you can adjust and keep moving forward. And finally, I don't care what happens to you. You're not a victim. You're only a victim if you allow yourself to be one.
Wow, that's so helpful. That's very helpful. And you're not even saying there's a process behind all three things. You're just saying just decide that you're not the victim. It's sort of what I hear.
I mean, let's remember you're I don't get too philosophical. If you read the book, what's that? It's right here. It's called The Untethered Soul. I recommend it highly. There's a book called The Untethered Soul that talks about there's the outside world. This is going to be a little philosophical, Rick, so bear with me. The outside world. I think we lost our screen.
I see you and I hear you.
Okay. So there's the outside world. Let me see here. There we go. So there's the outside world. Then there's your body, which is in the outside world, but it's a vessel. And then there's your thoughts. And many times thoughts lead to feelings. But you are not your thoughts and you're not your feelings. And we know that we're, intuitively, we know if we're at least a little bit self-reflective, we know that we're not our feelings because we know that we have certain feelings. We don't have to act upon them. So we know that there's a difference between who we are and our feelings. I think what people struggle with is trying to separate yourself from what your thoughts are. And so if I could impress upon you a concept that might make it a little easier for you when we talk about being a victim and we talk about persistence and hard work, You are not your thoughts. So when you're lying in bed and you're having all these thoughts run through your head, and this silly thought, this good thought, this potential thought, all these things, you may be generating those thoughts, but you are not those thoughts. And the reason we know that is because somebody has to be there who's listening to those thoughts. And that somebody is you. That's who you are. So you can have a thought that pops into your mind and you can examine it. You can determine whether it's valid or not valid, but it's not you. So by saying all that, what I'm saying is that it really doesn't matter what happens in the outside world. What matters is what you do in response. It matters how you perceive it. There's some people that could be sitting on the side of the road, penniless, in the hot sun, who are thinking to themselves, you know what? Thank God that I'm alive. I'm grateful that I'm alive for another day. There's some people be in that same circumstance who can complain about how hot it is and the fact they don't have any money and how they need water and how they wish they had shade, and we can go on and on and on. It's all a matter of which thoughts you choose to seize onto and ride. And so something terrible happens to you, you can look at it as, oh gosh, well, yep, just as I've always said, I'm a victim and I'm unlucky and I'm this and I'm that. Or you can say, okay, this happened. Where's the opportunity in this? What can I learn from this? Where do I go from this? And that's how I choose to be. And I'm not suggesting that's an easy way to be, but I'm suggesting that it can be learned. And the more you self-reflect and think about it, the better you'll be at it.
I love that, Tony. I think there's a couple of different concepts that I discovered through the process of writing the book. The first one is really mirrors what you just talked about. It seemed to me that throughout history, one of the evidences of a wise person is that they were able to see threats and flip them to opportunities. They were trying to figure out how to flip the threat into an opportunity. The second thing, going back to your comment about books a little while ago, that you and I we do love reading. That it seems to me in life there's only three things that really matter. Number one is the quality of the books that you read. Number two is the quality of the quiet time, the time you spend in silence as a man or a woman. And number three is the quality of your dinner table. And if man that gets all three of those things together, they're silent, or the woman, the silence, the quality of the books, and their dinner table together, they really have everything you could ever want. Give me some feedback on that.
I think that's right. I think I would go a little step further and say, you can control what you put into it's like you control what you put into your body as far as nutrition. We all know that the better you eat, the better you feel, the longer you live, et cetera, the better for your stress. We all know that the more sleep you get. I read your chapter about how you step back to getting up so damn early. I was like, oh my God, Rick. But laying that aside, you should check out the book because he talks about how he stepped back. Did you do it in 15-minute increments? As far
15-minute increments, yes.
I thought that was an interesting concept. And there's also a discussion in his book about fasting, which might have saved your life, but I'll let the readers read that. But you can control what you put in your body as far as nutrition. And we know intellectually, emotionally, everything, the science says that the better things you put in your body, the better your body's going to be. It's going to help you with your mental health. It's going to help you with your emotional health. It's going to help you philosophically. It's going to help you obviously physically. So running with that concept, you can control what you put in your mind, the music you listen to. If you're listening to music that's talking about killing people and making money and all these things that we know, at least in our core, are not the things that we most care about, you can control what you listen to. You can control who you listen to. You can control who you surround yourself with. So I think when you talk about the dinner table, I think that kind of is an offshoot of that. Who you choose to be friends with, who you choose to do business with, the cases that I choose to be involved in, the projects that you choose to be involved in, or the people that are on the projects that you choose to be involved in. There's some control there, and all of that leads to you as you're on your journey of life, finding your best self. You're not going to find your best self hanging around with a bunch of turkeys, right? That old saying, if you want to soar with the eagles, you can't surround yourself with turkeys. There's a hell of a lot of meaning in that. And sometimes you just have to say, no, that person is not, and sometimes it's family members. That person is not good in my life. That person is is holding me back. And that's not saying, oh, I'm just going to cut ties with everybody, that as I was on my way up. I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm suggesting is that the people in your life, the people you do business with, and the people you associate with. There's some people in that group, I'm assuming, that are probably holding you back in some respect, and you have to figure that out and make some tough choices. So, yeah, I agree with I agree with that. I do want to focus a little bit on one of the components you talked about is that quiet time. Completely underrated. A lot of people don't talk about it enough. Meditation has been something in quiet time that people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. It's something that I do every morning, just to quiet your mind and practice meditation. And if you don't like the word meditation, then call it quiet time. But find a place where there are no distractions, where you can sit in low light and just sit there and do nothing and listen. And you'll start becoming very aware of your thoughts in your mind. And you'll eventually get to a point where you can examine those thoughts, but not engage those thoughts. And eventually get to a point where you can just have a clear mind. And you'd be amazed at what it will do for your mental health, your physical health, your relationships. It's just, I can't emphasize enough a time each morning. I do it in the morning. You could do it in the evening as well, but I really suggest the morning time, where you get up maybe just a little bit early with no distractions before you get on your silly phone, before you fill yourself with all this junk on your phone and who liked your picture or who has texted you or your emails from work and all that foolishness that you're going to have to deal with during the day. Sit there quietly and just focus on the quiet. And if you need to use a mantra, some people have to use a mantra where they repeat a certain word or they repeat a certain phrase. If that helps you, do it that way. If it helps you to get in your cold plunge and sit there and that will clear your mind, that's another way to do it. Another way is to play, the bells, and use headphones and listen to quiet music. However you choose to do it, it gives you such a leg up on the day and really resets you before you have to go about the business of supporting your family and taking care of the things you need to take care of. I do it daily. If I don't do it, the truth is, if you say, I don't have time to do that, then you're not using your time wisely. Because it reminds me, and I tell my lawyers this all the time, you've heard the story about the two woodcutters, and one of them cut wood 8 hours solid a day, and one of them would cut wood for 8 hours, but he would take a 2-hour break in the middle of the day. And every day, the guy that only cut wood for 6 hours would cut a lot more wood than the guy that cut all day and never took a break. And so one day, the guy that was killing himself, cutting 8 hours a day, he said to the other guy, like, how the hell are you able to cut more wood from me than I do? And yet you're taking a 2-hour break during the day. What the devil are you doing during that 2 hours? And he said, I'm sharpening my saw. And that's what meditation to me is. Usually for me, it starts off with meditation, and then at some point it segues into prayer. And when in some days it might be only 10 minutes, and some days it may be 30 minutes. It really just however you're feeling that day and however your mind works on that day. But if I could give one for people that have a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a high stress job, I can't recommend enough the meditative process, because it's been around forever. It's a secret, but it's a secret that everybody knows.
Right. No, I agree 100%. It seems to me that that's the most terrifying thing a man could do sometimes, just be alone with himself, because you're sort of wondered who's going to show up. Is maybe the worst possible version of your mind, or maybe even
Right.
even a deity himself may show up.
Sometimes you sit there, Rick, and you examine your triggers. We all have triggers. There's certain things that trigger us, right? I'm not immune to that. I mean, I have triggers, and sometimes I sit there and say, why does that trigger me? And just sit there and focus on that. Or what, Francis did something yesterday, and it really rubbed me the wrong way. Why did that rub me the wrong way? And you sit there and you just think, and sometimes you find out things about yourself that you don't like about yourself. Well, good news is now you can start correcting that. But the worst, the non-reflective person is the worst kind of person you can deal with, because they're never going to change, because they don't know that they're screwed up in some respect. I think we're all on a journey of trying to find our best self. And part of it, and if you don't spend the time to sit alone with your thoughts and clear your mind, I don't see how you improve yourself. And I don't think it's possible.
Are there other core activities or core routines that are part of your daily schedule? So things like caffeine or diet or wake up times, work, key work times, how you get in a flow state. Are there key milestones in like your best possible productive day?
My best day is to get up early, and for me, early is 6 a.m. But I don't get wrapped around the axle if I get up at 7. I don't say, "Oh gosh, I'm already an hour behind." I do not do that. I try to avoid "I should" statements in my mind, and I focus on "I could." I I don't say I should work out. I say I could work out. I don't say I should do X. I say I could do X. It's a very subtle shift, but it really takes away a lot of the stress that we all feel like we're a little rat uh, on a little ring there running, and we can't keep up. So that's one thing that I would point out, that the reason I typically appear unstressed is because I truly am unstressed, because I do the things that I can do, but I never am in a situation where it's like, well, I should do this, I have to do this. There's very few things you have to do. I have to show up in court at a certain time, but sometimes I can reset that. I got to pay my taxes, but I can always push that off too. And I want to make sure that I'm getting the most out of the day that I can get. So I get up around 6. I'll sit. I have a particular, if I'm at this house, I have a particular chair here. I have a big bell that I'm kind of like Pavlov's dog. When I hit the bell, I know that I'm in the mode of doing some meditation. I use earphones or certain music that I listen to when I meditate. I have certain principles that I repeat in my mind about qualities that I think are the qualities that I should cultivate to be my best self, including honesty, kindness, caring, compassion, patient, empathy, humility, which means less pride, less vanity, being self-disciplined, unselfish, and having some quiet courage. I sometimes throw in there, being curious. A lot of times I don't think that we're as curious as we could be, and that makes us more judgmental. I think that the opposite of being judgmental is being more curious, because a lot of times when you tend to judge somebody, it's probably because you haven't asked enough questions about where they're coming from. And so that the quiet time kind of morphs into me talking about in my mind those certain principles. And then that kind of leads me to prayer. And then once I feel like I'm good for the day there, I'll usually go and do a sauna. I think there's great benefit to sauna, 15 or 20 minutes, about 150 degrees. 3 days a week, I have a trainer that I just do light weights and then do 30 minutes of stretching. I'll usually do a cold plunge. I find that it really just like wakes me up and really just gets me going. And I typically do it for 6 or 7 minutes at about 48 degrees. And that's another time when it's really quiet and I really focus and go over those same things that I went over when I meditate. I usually end that in a hot tub, which that's where I drink my coffee. And I mean, it sounds like I'm having this long spa day, but all this I get done before 9 a.m. typically. And then I'm ready to go. And I'm lucky that I have a staff that takes care of me. I got a lawyer that goes with me everywhere I go and makes sure I'm at the right place at the right time, and I'm briefed up on the things I need to be briefed on. And I have an assistant that's been with me for almost 20 years who sends me my calendar every night. She sends me my weekly calendar and then my calendar the day before each day. And I go about my day, and that may include, doing some work on briefing or motions or reviewing things, interviewing people. It could be having lunch with somebody. I don't do dinners with people. I quit doing that. I don't drink, so I don't go out and carouse with people and have drinks with people. Every month or two, we may have a firm event just to make sure that we work on our camaraderie amongst the firm. And of course, I go to that and give some feedback to the group. But that's kind of my routine, and I try to find time to read in the mornings, in the evenings. Sometimes during the day, I may pick up a book and read a little bit. I try to stay up to speed on current events. But for the most part, I'm, with the exception of all those things, I'm working on cases that I care about. I have the luxury of working on only cases that interest me. So not only am I screening cases to assign to lawyers in the firm, but I'm also working on cases that I'm personally involved in, and advancing the ball in those cases. And what we try to do is every evening, Francis and I try to have a meal together. Usually we go out to eat, but sometimes I like to cook. Sometimes Francis cooks. And I usually get to bed around midnight every night. So that's kind of my day. And sometimes that's broken up by maybe in Dallas, or I may be elsewhere. But most any place I am, I have the ability to have a place that I meditate, have a place that I do a cold plunge, and usually a sauna. I think the benefits of sauna are just now becoming more and more understood. For somebody like me who's now in my 50s, stretching is super important. So I make sure that I get either with a trainer stretching 3 times a week, and then I do stretching on my own on the off day. So doesn't sound too exciting. I'm not jetting out to Los Angeles or Hollywood or New York that often, but I am trying to stay true to what people hire me for, which is ultimately people hire me to kick ass, and that's why I'm proud to when I am called upon, and I try to do that.
Love that. Let's see some of the comments here, and we'll get some questions here. Got a comment here from Mike. Becky's also a big prayer as well. Becky also said, great advice. Really like the advice. We're going to wrap up here in about 5 or 10 minutes here. We'll get some of these questions here. I think one of the, there's a comment from Kelly. Gig 'em, Tony.
Of course, always.
Yes. All right, we got a question here. We knew it would come in. Do you feel comfortable giving us an update on what's happening?
Well, we saw the verdict came out last week, and I always knew that the RICO case, on the facts that we knew, was tough. It was kind of like fitting a square peg into a round hole. And I knew that the jury would struggle with that. And it's just a complicated case. I mean, I've tried RICO cases before. They're very hard to even plead the case properly. You have to show an overarching conspiracy, and then you have to show control by the so-called kingpin, and you have to show these predicate acts all beyond a reasonable doubt. That's really tough to do, especially when you're not talking about a mobster or a gangster or a gang. You're talking about a guy that's running a record company and doing a bunch of other things, as we learned. So he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's technically 10 years per charge that was convicted on. I expect he'll get 2 to 4 years. He's already served almost a year. I expect that that's if the judge follows the sentencing guidelines, we're looking at a 2 to 4 year sentence in federal prison. Plus, there's some things that he can do to mitigate that, some programs that he can take advantage of. For me, we have about 120 cases. A portion of them are filed in New York. A portion are now being filed in Los Angeles. And we're going to keep on. Sorry, I got to log back in. We're going to keep on pressing our cases. I've always said that, we're not suing him for RICO, and we're not suing him for sex trafficking. We're suing him for sexual assault, which are state law issues. And, I'm pretty confident about our cases, especially after learning all the things that we learned in the criminal trial. So that's really all I can really say about it, other than, the case. I thought they might get him on sexual trafficking. but I don't believe the jury believed the coercion part with regard to Jane and with regard to Cassie. I think there was just too much doubt about whether they were willing participants. And I think the jury had a difficult time understanding the concept that you can consent one day and not consent the other day. And I think that was a difficulty. Um, and that's really all I can say about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And the idea that you've got these ladies that have been victimized by such a powerful man, it seems that you see the same theme repeatedly in the news. Do you see from someone outside, and I think I texted this to you a couple months ago, that one reason why you're one of the handful of people that I pray for on a regular basis, Tony, is you're one of the very handful of people that I see that are actually battling manifest evil, like as a career. Like this is like clear, evident evil that's predatory on the most vulnerable in our society that cannot defend themselves. And you are one of the very few people that is gifted enough to be able to go and interfere and interject and be able to hopefully mediate some justice there. Do you see it from such a philosophical standpoint whenever you're in there on the ground, or does it look different?
Here's the way I look at it. It takes a lot of courage for someone who believes they've been victimized to step forward, because in today's age, anybody that steps forward is going to be roundly criticized. They're going to be attacked. They're going to be people are going to do something called shadow banning. They're going to have there's Twitter bots, and they're just going to be. I mean, it's real, death threats. It takes a lot for somebody who, especially when it's somebody who has a lot of notoriety and is famous, if you will. So in that respect, when I talk to these potential clients and they tell me their story, and I hate to do this, but I read them the riot act. I tell them, look, you sure you want to do this? Are you sure? This may lead to your identity being revealed. We may have to have a public trial. You're going to be attacked. I go through all this. I have to do this because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be doing them a service and I wouldn't be doing justice to them. In many cases, these people just say, Tony, this happened to me, but I just don't want to go through that. So for the people that actually choose to do that, even though we may file their case under John Doe or Jane Doe, they have been told and they know that ultimately their identity will be revealed. That's what motivates me. I don't really look at it in the terms of evil, fighting evil. I mean, because on the other side, they think they're fighting evil. They think that I'm evil. They think the client is evil because the client's making up stories, or at least their lawyer thinks that. So I don't really look at it in a philosophical way. What I look at is when this is all said and done, is this going to advance this person in any way? This person at least going to feel like that he or she had their voice heard? Are they going to feel like they did what they felt they had to do so they could move on past what they believe has happened to them? I want to leave this person better than when I found them. The worst thing I can do is leave them worse off than I found them. And that's what I struggle with, because the way these cases have been going, and a lot of times, the alleged victim is victimized over and over and over again, either by the press or the alleged perpetrator or the perpetrator's lawyers, and it's becoming tougher. You would think in today's day and age it has become easier, but I think it's become tougher for someone to step forward. I've had cases where they don't go to the criminal authorities. They get criticized for that. They do go to the criminal authorities. They not only get criticized for that, but then the criminal authorities realize that the burden of proof in a criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt, and they choose not to pursue the criminal matter. And then the client gets criticized for that. So it's really tough. I've done a lot of reading on people that have rape victims who have went through the process, and a lot of them, even when they get a conviction, at the end of the day, say to themselves, maybe I shouldn't have done this. This took 3 years of my life away, and it's traumatized me even more. But I got to fight the good fight. When somebody comes to me and they say they've been victimized by somebody powerful, somebody famous, there's only a few people in the country that have the courage to help them, and I'm proud to be one of those people. And I'm going to continue to plug. It's despite how much criticism I personally receive. I'm like a duck; it goes off my back like water. I got 24-hour security. I'm going to keep on keeping on, doing the work that I believe I was put here to do. One time, I was talking to my daughter about a particular case that I won't mention, but I was talking to her about, should I do this case? Is this a case that I should be doing? Because these aren't lucrative cases. People always talk about, oh, this is a money grab, and that's so far outside of what's the truth. I mean, these are not lucrative cases to me. Lucrative cases for me is somebody gets burned or killed at a refinery. Those are $100 million cases. Those are cases that, if I'm successful, I can make a lot of money, and try to put the family back together again as best I can. The kind of cases that you're talking about, these alleged sexual assaults, these are not lucrative cases, and they're very gut wrenching. They're very difficult, not only for me, but mostly difficult for the alleged victim. But if they step forward and I believe them, and they have some evidence that supports their story, and they're willing to go forward, if I think it's a good case, I'll go forward. And as my dad used to say, if you're right, go ahead. Or as my daughter said, this is why you became a lawyer, Dad.
I love that. I love that. Well, we are at a hard stop. You have another media appearance you've got to get to. Tony, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Buy the book. Buy the book.
You heard the man. You heard the man.
All right. Buy that book. It's easy to buy. Amazon right there.
Yeah, it's free today. It's free today on Amazon.
Wait a minute. Was mine free?
Yours is free. Did you?
I'm kidding. Yes, of course. All right. All right, man. Thank you.
I appreciate you, Tony. Thanks a lot.
See you later.
Everyone, thanks so much for joining us. We sure appreciate it. Thanks for Tony Buzbee. Go to Tony Buzbee, Busby Law Firm if you want more information, or reach out to Tony. Follow him on all the socials. We're looking forward to that. Again, today is bestseller push day. Really excited about today. Again, we already hit #1 in both the US and the UK on the leadership channels. We go to Amazon today and buy the paperback. The paperback's 30% off, $9.99. It would mean the world to me. If you know any underperforming men in your life, men that are sort of 25 to 45 that just haven't really come out of their shell, haven't met the full potential that you would wish for them, it's a great book for them. Buy 2, 3, 4, 5 to hand to your sons and your cousins and your husband's ladies. It's just a great tool, and Tony has endorsed it, and so have very many other men of notoriety, great men that have put their lives together and helped put the lives of many others together. So appreciate it. At 3:00 today, I'm doing another live stream with Pastor Paul Vanderclay. He is a Reformed Church pastor. He's an epic YouTuber, a very, very wise man. We're going to spend about an hour and a half, 2 hours together, however much time he's got, and we're going to go deep on relevance. We're going to go deep on systems and processes. We're going to go deep on how to live a wholesome life of relevance. And then tonight at 7 is the founder of Wired Magazine, Kevin Kelly. This is the man who wrote the book 1,000 True Fans. He's got another book on wisdom that's out. He is the sage to a large swath of Silicon Valley tech elites. He's been that for 30 years. He is the godfather. Kevin Kelly, founder of Wired Magazine, former founding editor of Wired Magazine, will be live across all the platforms today. But again, today's bestseller push day. It would mean the world to me if you left a review of the book on Amazon. If you ordered a couple of paperback copies on Amazon, do exactly like Tony said. It would mean the world to me. But we look forward to seeing you back here at 3:00 today. Everyone, have a blessed rest of your day. Thanks a lot.